They laughed at him in divorce court. Until the judge read his mother's will. The courtroom laughed that day. Not because something was funny, but because humiliation is entertaining when it isn't yours. He stood alone at the defense table while whispers cut through the air like blades. Her lawyer smirked. Her friends watched. Even she smiled, certain the case was already won. Then the judge unfolded a document. Old, yellowed, final. His mother's will. The room fell silent. Faces drained of color. Laughter died mid-breath. Because in a single paragraph, the man they called a loser became the owner of everything they thought they were taking from him. And that was only the beginning. The courthouse smelled of old paper, polished wood, and quiet judgment. The kind of place where people came to have their lives reduced to exhibits and signatures. Where love was measured in assets and resentment spoke through lawyers instead of mouths. Morning light filtered through tall, narrow windows, slicing across the marble floor in pale stripes, illuminating dust motes that drifted lazily, unaware of the gravity unfolding beneath them. Daniel Mercer sat alone at the defendant's table. His suit was clean but dated. The kind a man bought once and wore only when life forced him to. The cuffs were slightly frayed, the shoulders a fraction too loose, as if he had lost weight he never intended to lose. His hands rested calmly on the table, fingers loosely interlocked, knuckles pale not from tension but from stillness. He looked straight ahead, eyes steady, expression unreadable. Behind him, laughter whispered. Not loud enough to be reprimanded, not quiet enough to be kind. Evelyn sat across the aisle, legs crossed, posture perfect, dressed in soft cream silk that caught the light and made her seem untouched by stress or consequence. Her hair was flawless, her makeup deliberate in its effortlessly. She did not look at Daniel, not directly. She glanced past him, through him, as though he were a piece of furniture she had outgrown. Her lawyer leaned close, murmuring something that made her smile. That smile carried history. It had once meant warmth, reassurance, shared secrets in the dark. Now it was sharpened, honed by months of certainty, by the belief that this day was not a battle but a formality. Everything had already been decided, she thought. Money had been traced, accounts audited, property valued. Daniel had nothing worth fighting over. And everyone knew it. The benches behind Evelyn were filled. Her parents sat side by side, her mother's hand resting proudly on her father's arm. Faces composed with the smug patience of people watching a process they trusted would favor them. Her brother leaned back, arms folded, chewing gum slowly, eyes fixed on Daniel with open disdain. A few friends occupied the remaining seats, their expressions a blend of curiosity and satisfaction, like spectators who had paid nothing yet expected entertainment. Daniel felt their eyes on him. He did not turn. He had learned long ago that dignity did not announce itself. It endured. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge entered, robe swaying, face neutral in the practiced way of someone who had seen every version of human collapse and refused to be surprised by any of them. Everyone rose. Daniel rose with them, movements unhurried, spine straight, gaze forward. When they sat again, the air seemed heavier, thicker with expectation. Evelyn's lawyer stood first. His voice was smooth, confident, trained to sound reasonable even when delivering cruelty. He spoke of irreconcilable differences, of emotional abandonment, of a marriage that had allegedly offered Evelyn nothing but disappointment and delay. He described Daniel as unambitious, passive, content to drift while Evelyn carried the weight of progress on her shoulders. A murmur of agreement rippled softly through the benches. Daniel listened without reaction. Each accusation passed through him like weather, felt, acknowledged, allowed to move on. He had heard worse in private, in quieter rooms, spoken with more venom and less polish. The lawyer concluded by outlining the requested settlement. The house, already sold. The savings, minimal. No alimony. No contest. A clean break. In other words, a man leaving with exactly what they believed he deserved. Nothing. Evelyn finally looked at Daniel then, tilting her head slightly, studying him as one might inspect an object before discarding it. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, not regret, not doubt, but curiosity. She seemed to be waiting for him to react, to protest, to plead, to collapse in a way that would confirm every story she had told about him. He did not. When it was his turn to speak, Daniel stood slowly. The room leaned in almost imperceptibly, anticipation tightening like a drawn wire. This was the moment humiliation usually reached its peak, when the weaker party revealed himself through desperation. Daniel did not grip the podium. He did not clear his throat excessively or fumble with papers. He spoke calmly. "I have no objection to the dissolution of the marriage," he said, voice steady, carrying easily through the chamber. "I agree to the division as stated." A pause followed, thick and confused. Evelyn's smile faltered, just slightly. The judge raised an eyebrow, surprised but unsurprised, accustomed to men surrendering quietly when they believed resistance was futile. He nodded, making a note. Daniel sat back down. That was it. No speech, no defense, no visible pain. Behind him, someone scoffed softly. Evelyn's brother shook his head with a grin that said, "I told you so." Her mother leaned toward her father, whispering something that made them both smile. Daniel stared ahead, breathing evenly. What none of them noticed was the envelope inside his inner jacket pocket, pressed flat against his chest. Old paper. Heavy meaning. A document he had carried for weeks without opening, waiting not for courage, but for the right moment. This was not that moment. Not yet. Outside the courthouse, clouds gathered slowly, darkening the sky with deliberate patience. Inside, the court prepared to move forward, unaware that the foundation beneath their certainty was already cracking. And Daniel Mercer, the man they had decided was nothing, waited in silence as the machinery of judgment rolled, confidently toward a conclusion. It did not yet understand. The judge adjusted his glasses and scanned the paperwork again, his pen hovering above the page as if hesitating out of habit rather than doubt. The room had settled into a false calm, the kind that followed surrender, the kind that made people believe the difficult part was over. Evelyn shifted slightly in her seat, crossing and uncrossing her legs, already imagining the lunch she would have after this was done, already planning how she would tell the story later, how clean it was, how easy, how little there was to fight for. The judge cleared his throat. "Before the court finalizes the settlement," he said evenly, "there is an outstanding matter referenced in the preliminary filings that must be addressed." Evelyn's lawyer frowned faintly. He leaned forward, scanning his notes, then straightened again, confident the interruption was procedural at best. The judge continued. "The respondent's mother, Margaret Mercer, passed away last year. Correct?" Daniel rose slightly from his chair. "Yes, Your Honor." A quiet stir moved through the courtroom. Evelyn stiffened. Her parents exchanged a brief glance, confusion flickering across their faces before settling into indifference. Daniel's mother had been a ghost in their marriage, spoken of rarely, dismissed easily, an aging woman in a small town. No property worth mentioning, no influence worth tracking. She had never approved of Evelyn, and Evelyn had never cared. The judge tapped the document in front of him. "It appears," he said, "that probate for her estate was delayed." Daniel nodded. "At her request." Evelyn's lawyer stood again, a polite smile fixed in place. "Your Honor, with respect, the estate of the respondent's mother has no bearing on the dissolution proceedings. According to our records, there were no significant assets declared at the time of death." A ripple of quiet agreement followed. Someone in the gallery chuckled softly. The judge did not smile. "Perhaps," he said, "but the court received a formal submission this morning from the executor of the estate. It was filed late due to an administrative delay, but it is valid and legally binding." Evelyn's smile froze. Daniel felt the familiar pressure against his chest, the envelope heavy in his jacket, as though reminding him that patience, when practiced long enough, became power. The judge lifted a thin folder, its edges worn, its label handwritten rather than typed. He opened it slowly, deliberately, as if aware that the sound of paper could shift a room. "Margaret Mercer's last will and testament," he read aloud. The air changed. Evelyn leaned forward now, brows knitting together, irritation replacing confidence. Her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, though there was nothing in his voice but speculation. Her brother sat up straighter, gum forgotten. Her parents' smiles had faded, replaced by the guarded stillness of people who sensed movement beneath their feet but could not yet see the crack. The judge began to read. The will was brief, written in clear, careful language. Margaret Mercer had been a woman who believed in precision, in leaving nothing open to interpretation. She named her son as sole heir. That part drew no reaction. A poor woman leaving a poor estate changed nothing. Then the judge paused. His eyes moved back to the page, then up again, his expression sharpening. "There is," he said slowly, "a clause that requires clarification for the court." He adjusted his glasses again and continued. "To my son, Daniel Mercer, I leave not only what I own, but what I am owed. This includes all holdings, trusts, and properties registered under the Mercer Family Preservation Trust, established in 1989. The words did not land immediately. They hovered. Evelyn blinked once, as if her ears had misfired. Her lawyer stiffened. Her father leaned forward abruptly, the color draining from his face in a way that did not go unnoticed. The Mercer Family Preservation Trust. The name carried weight, old weight, the kind that did not announce itself publicly. It was the sort of thing discussed in closed rooms, recorded in ledgers that never saw daylight. Evelyn's family knew it. They had known of it for years. They just had not known Daniel was connected to it. A murmur spread through the courtroom now, louder, uncontrolled. The judge raised a hand for silence, but the damage was done. Something had shifted irreversibly. Evelyn turned toward Daniel, really looked at him for the first time in months. Not through him. At him. He met her gaze calmly. The judge continued reading, his voice steady but no longer neutral. The trust includes but is not limited to commercial real estate holdings, financial instruments, and controlling shares in multiple privately held companies. Evelyn's breath caught audibly. Her lawyer stood abruptly. "Your Honor, we request an immediate recess. This information was not disclosed during discovery." The judge's eyes flicked toward him. Because it was not yet transferred, the trust remained under the control of the decedent until probate concluded. He paused, then added, "which concludes today." Silence fell like a physical force. Daniel felt it settle over the room, heavy and undeniable. He had grown up knowing this inheritance existed, knowing his mother had chosen to live modestly, deliberately, teaching him restraint while others mistook it for lack. She had taught him that power revealed itself only when necessary. The judge closed the folder. "At the time of this filing," he said, "Mr. Mercer is now the legal beneficiary of the trust in its entirety." Evelyn's world tilted. Her carefully rehearsed narrative collapsed under the weight of a truth she had never bothered to ask about. Her certainty fractured. Her confidence bled into disbelief. Daniel remained seated, hands folded, expression unchanged. He had not raised his voice. He had not defended himself. He had simply waited. And now the room understood why. The judge did not speak for several seconds after closing the folder. And in that pause the courtroom transformed from a place of quiet ridicule into something tighter, more dangerous, like a room where a hidden mechanism had been triggered and no one yet knew where the walls would move. Evelyn's lawyer remained standing, hands braced on the table, his confidence leaking away in small, visible increments as he recalculated everything he had assumed was settled. Evelyn herself had gone still, not composed, not dignified, but frozen, as if movement might make the truth more real. Her lips parted slightly, her carefully controlled breathing faltering for the first time that morning. She stared at Daniel, as though the man she had been, married to had been replaced by a stranger wearing his face. Daniel did not look back immediately. He kept his gaze forward, aware of the shift, aware of the sudden gravity in the room, but unwilling to satisfy it. He had learned long ago that revelation was more powerful when unaccompanied by explanation. Let them connect the dots themselves. Let them feel the embarrassment bloom without his assistance. The judge finally spoke. "In light of this new information," he said, voice calm but firm, "the court must revisit the financial disclosures submitted during discovery." Evelyn's lawyer swallowed. "Your Honor, My client acted in good faith based on the information available at the time. The judge's eyes flicked toward Evelyn. Did you, Mrs. Mercer, have any knowledge of this trust prior to today? Evelyn opened her mouth, then closed it. Her father shifted beside her, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the judge with a look that suggested calculation rather than confusion. Evelyn felt the weight of both their expectations pressing in on her. No, she said finally, though the word came out thin. I didn't. The judge studied her for a moment longer than was comfortable, then nodded once. Very well. He turned back to Daniel. Mr. Mercer, were you aware of the trust? Daniel stood slowly. The sound of his chair legs against the floor echoed louder than it should have. Yes, Your Honor, he said. I was aware it existed. A murmur rippled again, sharper this time. And did you intentionally omit this information during proceedings? The judge asked. No, Daniel replied evenly. At the time of filing, the trust was not legally mine. My mother remained the sole controlling authority until probate concluded. The judge considered this, then nodded again. That aligns with the documentation. Evelyn's lawyer sat down heavily, rubbing his temple. From the gallery, expressions had changed. The curiosity that once bordered on amusement had curdled into discomfort. The friends who had come expecting a spectacle now shifted in their seats, glancing at one another, reassessing their allegiance. Even Evelyn's brother looked uncertain. His earlier grin gone, replaced by a cautious frown. Daniel felt none of it as triumph, only relief. The judge leaned back slightly. Given the substantial change in Mr. Mercer's financial standing, he said, the court will need to reassess the proposed settlement. Evelyn's heart began to pound. This was not how the story was supposed to go. She had imagined walking out of this building lighter, unburdened, validated. She had planned to tell people that Daniel had been dead weight, that leaving him had been an act of self-respect. Now, every assumption she had built that narrative upon was collapsing in real time. Her lawyer whispered urgently, but she barely heard him. The judge continued. Mrs. Mercer, you are now requesting a division, based on the presumption that Mr. Mercer possessed minimal assets. That presumption is no longer valid. Evelyn leaned forward, desperation edging into her voice. Your Honor, the marriage was still a partnership. His inheritance is separate property, the judge interrupted calmly. Inherited assets are not subject to division unless commingled. There is no evidence they were. The words struck her like a physical blow. Separate. Untouchable. The judge turned another page. However, he said, there are additional considerations. Evelyn's lawyer looked up sharply, hope flaring. The judge's gaze shifted to Daniel. Mrs. Mercer's counsel has made allegations regarding your contribution to the marriage. Specifically that you were financially passive and dependent. Daniel nodded slightly. Yes, Your Honor. The judge steepled his fingers. Would you care to respond? For the first time that day, Daniel paused. Not because he was unsure, but because choosing the right truth mattered. He glanced briefly at Evelyn, taking in the tension in her shoulders, the faint tremor in her hands. He saw recognition dawning there now, memories resurfacing that had once been dismissed as insignificant. I chose to work where I did, he said finally, because it allowed flexibility. My mother's health declined years before her death. I needed to be available. A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. I contributed to our household in ways that were not reflected on a balance sheet, he continued. I handled logistics, maintenance, scheduling, support. I stepped back so she could step forward. Evelyn's throat tightened. She remembered late nights when he waited up for her, the way he quietly solved problems she never noticed because they were already solved. She remembered calling him unambitious, never asking what he had sacrificed. The judge listened without interruption. When my mother passed, Daniel added, I delayed probate intentionally. She asked me to wait. She believed timing mattered. The judge nodded slowly, understanding flickering across his face. From the gallery, Evelyn's father leaned toward her mother, whispering urgently. Their faces were pale now, guarded. This was no longer entertainment. This was exposure. The judge closed his notes. The court will adjourn briefly to review amended disclosures. He struck the gavel. The sound echoed, final and sharp. As people began to rise, the room buzzed with subdued conversation. Eyes followed Daniel now, not with mockery, but with curiosity edged by something else, respect, perhaps, or fear. Evelyn remained seated, staring at the table in front of her. Her reflection warped in its polished surface. She had laughed at him, and now the room no longer did. The recess stretched longer than anyone expected, the kind of delay that allowed thoughts to spiral unchecked. The courtroom emptied in fragments, small clusters forming in the hallway. Voices lowered but urgent, the sound of leather shoes. Against tile echoing like punctuation. Marks to unfinished conversations. Daniel stepped outside alone, standing near a tall window that overlooked the city street below, where life continued with careless normalcy, unaware that power was quietly changing hands several floors above. He loosened his tie, breathing deeply, not from nerves but from release. The air felt different now, lighter in his chest, though the weight of his mother's absence pressed harder than ever. Margaret Mercer had always believed in restraint, in silence as strategy. Let them underestimate you, she had said once, sitting at a small kitchen table that looked nothing like the boardrooms tied to her name. People reveal their intentions when they think you can't hurt them. Down the hall, Evelyn stood with her parents, her lawyer speaking rapidly, his voice strained with the effort of salvaging something from the wreckage. Her father's face had hardened into a mask of calculation, anger simmering just beneath the surface. "You knew," he hissed quietly, keeping his voice low enough to avoid attention. "You must have known something." Evelyn shook her head, tears threatening but not yet falling. He never talked about it. His mother barely talked to anyone. Her mother folded her arms, lips pursed. "That doesn't matter now. What matters is damage control." Evelyn's lawyer rubbed his face, fatigue lining his features. "If we had known about the trust, strategy would have been different." Her father snapped his gaze toward him. "Strategy. You told us this was airtight." The lawyer did not respond. Evelyn felt the first true crack in her composure then, not from fear of loss but from humiliation. Every whispered laugh from earlier replayed in her mind, every smug glance, every assumption that Daniel's silence meant weakness. She realized with a sickening clarity that she had not only misjudged him but displayed that misjudgment publicly. Across the hall, Daniel watched none of it. He watched the city instead, remembering hospital rooms and long drives, remembering the night his mother had handed him the envelope without ceremony, her voice calm even as her body failed. "Do not open it yet," she had said. "Wait until the world shows you who it thinks you are." He had not understood then. He did now. The bailiff's voice cut through the corridor, calling everyone back inside. The courtroom filled again, tension snapping into place like a drawn bowstring. Evelyn returned to her seat, posture stiff, face pale, while Daniel resumed his place with quiet composure. The judge entered, expression unchanged, but the room sensed finality approaching. Everyone stood. Everyone Saturday. The judge adjusted his papers. "The court has reviewed the updated documentation and disclosures." He looked directly at Evelyn. "Mrs. Mercer, the court finds no evidence of financial misconduct or concealment on the part of Mr. Mercer." Evelyn's lawyer closed his eyes briefly. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "the allegations regarding Mr. Mercer's lack of contribution to the marriage are not supported by testimony or documentation when examined in context." Daniel remained still. "The dissolution will proceed under the original terms requested by Mr. Mercer," the judge said, "with no claim against inherited assets." Evelyn's breath hitched. That should have been the end of it. But the judge did not stop. "There is," he said, "one additional matter." Every head lifted. The judge turned to Daniel. "Mr. Mercer, your mother's will includes a directive that has jurisdictional relevance to this court." Daniel felt the room tighten again. The judge picked up the folder once more. Margaret Mercer established provisions to ensure her estate would not be leveraged through marital dissolution or bad faith claims. She authorized legal action in the event of demonstrated contempt or exploitation. Evelyn's lawyer stiffened. Your Honor. The judge raised a hand. This court is not imposing penalties today. However, the directive empowers Mr. Mercer to pursue recovery of legal fees should he choose. A quiet, stunned silence followed. Evelyn turned toward Daniel, eyes wide. A silent plea forming where certainty once lived. This was the moment where mercy might still rewrite the ending, where a single word from him could soften the blow. Daniel met her gaze. For a heartbeat, the past flickered between them. Shared mornings, shared plans, a life that could have been navigated differently. Had patience existed where contempt grew instead? He looked away. I waive that right, he said calmly. The judge nodded, acknowledging the decision without commentary. The gavel came down. This court is adjourned. The sound echoed through the chamber, sealing more than a divorce. It sealed the collapse of a narrative carefully, constructed on the assumption that silence meant surrender. People rose slowly, the energy drained, conversations muted. Daniel gathered his things with deliberate care, buttoned his jacket, and turned toward the exit. As he passed Evelyn, she spoke his name softly, desperation threading through the syllables. Daniel. He stopped, just briefly. Yes. Her voice trembled. You could have told me. He considered her for a moment, then replied with quiet honesty. You never asked. He walked away. Behind him, Evelyn remained standing in the middle of the courtroom, surrounded by people yet entirely alone. The laughter that once buoyed her, confidence now replaced by a silence. That cost her everything she thought she had won. The courthouse doors closed behind Daniel with a muted finality, the heavy wood absorbing the echoes of everything that had been said and everything that never would be. Outside, the afternoon had softened into late evening. The sky washed in pale grey and gold, the kind of quiet light that followed storms even when no rain had fallen. People moved along the steps, lawyers on phones, couples arguing in low voices, strangers brushing past one another without recognition. Daniel paused at the top of the stairs. For the first time that day, there was nowhere else he needed to be. He stood still, breathing in the cool air, feeling the weight of the past finally loosen its grip. The envelope was still in his jacket pocket, thinner now in meaning though unchanged in form. It had done what it was meant to do. It had protected him without turning him into something unrecognizable. Behind him, the doors opened again. Evelyn stepped out slowly, her parents trailing several paces behind, her lawyer already gone. His obligation fulfilled the moment the gavel struck. She stopped when she saw Daniel, hesitation pulling at her steps. Her parents lingered, unsure whether to follow or retreat, their faces marked by a blend of frustration and dawning regret. Daniel turned before she spoke. They stood facing one another on the courthouse steps, the distance between them both small and immeasurable. The city moved around them, indifferent to their reckoning. I didn't know, Evelyn said quietly, the words stripped of their former edge. About your mother. About any of it. Daniel studied her face. The confidence that once defined her now fractured into something more human, more uncertain. He believed her, at least in part. Ignorance had always been easier than curiosity. She didn't want to be known, he replied evenly. She believed privacy was a form of freedom. Evelyn swallowed. And you? He glanced out at the street, where a man was teaching a child how to ride a bicycle, hands hovering just inches away from the handlebars, ready to catch but hoping not to need to. I'm still learning, he said. Her father cleared his throat, stepping forward with forced composure. Daniel, he began, extending a hand that carried no warmth, only calculation. Perhaps we can speak later. There may be matters worth discussing. Daniel looked at the hand, then back at the man's face. No, he said simply. The word landed without anger, without explanation, and without room for negotiation. He turned back to Evelyn. I didn't lose today, he said gently. But I didn't win either. I just stopped pretending. Tears welled in her eyes then, finally breaking free. I thought you were holding me back. He shook his head slightly. You thought I was invisible. That truth hung between them, undeniable. Evelyn's mother placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. pulling her back subtly, already sensing the futility of further words. The family began to retreat down the steps, their figures diminishing against the stone facade of the building they had once entered so confidently. Daniel watched them go, feeling no triumph, no satisfaction, only closure. He descended the steps and walked toward his car, an older model parked beneath a leafless tree. He unlocked it, sat behind the wheel, and rested his hands there for a moment, eyes closed. The future stretched ahead of him, wide and uncharted, unburdened by the need to prove himself to anyone who had already decided who he was. He thought of his mother again, her quiet discipline, her refusal to explain herself to those who would never listen. She had taught him that legacy was not about wealth but about choice. The engine started smoothly. As Daniel pulled away from the curb, he passed the courthouse one last time, its windows reflecting the fading light. Inside those walls, laughter had once dismissed him. Silence had answered on his behalf. And in that silence, he had inherited more than money. He had inherited himself. Subscribe for more cinematic stories where silence speaks louder than revenge. A like, share, and comment to support powerful storytelling that stays with you.